Welcome to the Long-Term Investor. Today with me is founder of Define Financial and the host of the Stay Wealthy podcast, and my good friend, Taylor Schulte. Taylor, thanks so much for joining me here today.
Absolutely, Peter. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you so much is I've recently been covering some retirement issues, and you specialize specifically in working with people who are approaching retirement and entering retirement. And so I do want to dive specifically into a retirement topic that comes up a lot in both of our practices. But just generally, before we dive into that, kind of would just be interested to hear what you feel like are some of the biggest pain points that you see on a regular basis, being the specialist that you are.
Yeah. So, like you said, we specialize in working with people pretty much over age 50 who are either approaching retirement or in retirement. And the clients we do our best work for have done a good job saving money. In some cases, they've saved too much money. And one of the pain points they have is taxes in retirement. They've accumulated all this wealth inside of a pre-tax traditional IRA, and they know at age 72, the IRS is going to come knocking on their door and force them to take money out. And they realize there's a big, looming tax bill later on in retirement. So one of their big pain points is, I've saved all this money. I've done a good job accumulating it. Now, how do I get it out of these accounts tax efficiently and don't overpay the IRS? The other pain point is creating income, right? I've done a good job saving money. Now, how do I turn this pot of money into income? And then lastly, navigating expenses in retirement. In one of those expenses that is a big one is healthcare, and part of that is Medicare and how to navigate Medicare. And I know one of the things we're going to talk about today is Medicare IRMA surcharges and getting dinged for making too much money and paying an additional fee on top of that. So those are really the three things that we specialize in helping clients with.
And successful retirement savers in general are going to be facing potential IRMA charges to begin with, because they have been done such a nice job of putting money away into tax deferred accounts. And they were not always high income, but certainly in the top 50% at a minimum, sometimes in the top 1% of income. And so you're used to spending a lot, as you mentioned, creating somewhat of an income for yourself out of these accounts that create taxes, plus you're just managing your investments. And so IRMA is something that ends up coming into play for a lot of people. Particularly, I think people who get caught off guard are those who are do-it-yourselfers. And so I am sure, like you, when someone over the age of 50 approaches us who's been a do-it-yourselfer their whole life, they may listen to podcasts like yours and mine and hear about some of these planning strategies. And this is kind of one of those areas where they don't check all the boxes and know exactly what they're doing. So I would love to take that deep dive with you. Just starting, let's get with the basics. What is IRMA? How does it work? What are the basics?
Yeah, and one thing I'll really highlight here, based on what you said, is there's kind of this key theme here when it comes to retirement planning and tax planning specifically, which is being proactive, right? A lot of these, good retirement savers, do-it-yourself investors, they enjoy their gap years when income is low, and all of a sudden they're caught off guard at age 72. So there's this theme of just being proactive and looking ahead at what could happen and getting ahead of that and doing some proper planning. And IRMA is certainly one of those things. So IRMA stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. And we don't need to say that again. We'll just call it IRMA from here on out. And it represents an increase to your Medicare Part D and Part B standard monthly premiums. And like we already said, basically, if you make too much money, if you have too much taxable income, you're going to get hit with a higher Medicare monthly premium. IRMA is based on your modified adjusted gross income. And here's the thing, it's based on your modified adjusted gross income from 2 years ago. So again, that theme of being proactive, we have to think about what are we doing right now this year, and how is that going to impact me 2 years from now or 10 years from now? And so today, here in 2022, the 2022 IRMA brackets are going to be based on your modified adjusted gross income from 2020, 2 years ago. And if that amount's not available, then they'll just use your 2019.
And I think you highlighted a point of people get caught off guard, in these gap years where there aren't a lot of income. I think it sort of speaks to where an advisor adding value these days. It used to be that an advisor was all just about giving you an asset allocation, making sure that you have the right funds, that you keep costs low, that you rebalance. now taxes become such a big part of it. And I know one of the most common phrases that we're telling people when they come to us in their 50s and 60s is, hey, we should run a tax projection here. Because a lot of times when you're moving dollars in different ways, a tax projection is really just about eliminating surprises. And I think IRMA is one of these classic things at which it does catch people off guard. They think maybe they're doing something responsible by doing a partial Roth conversion, but they do too much and don't think about that. Or maybe they've switched to municipal bonds, switched away from municipal bonds because they thought, well, my income's not that high anymore, and they trigger IRMA considerations there. So I guess a lot of people, again, who are listening to a conversation on IRMA are naturally kind of nerding out on these financial planning issues to begin with. If not, we've already lost them, Taylor. Yeah. But so assuming we got the real money nerds with us here, what are kind of the misconceptions people have or something that people don't understand that leads to the mistakes?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting is you hear a lot of people complaining about IRMA. I make too much money, so I'm getting hit with this surcharge. One of our mutual friends has this comment that he says, give me your income and I'll pay your taxes, right? So yes, it's an annoying little surcharge that you have to pay. And in some cases, that surcharge, that small little surcharge, and we can talk about some of the numbers, prevents people from doing really impactful things like Roth conversions. I don't want to do a Roth conversion this year because it's going to cause me to have an IRMA surcharge 2 years from now. Well, maybe it makes sense to go ahead and do that conversion, even if you get stuck with that IRMA surcharge 2 years from now, because that Roth conversion is going to make a bigger impact over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And that's one of the challenges with tax planning. I know you can relate to this, which is we want to be careful about looking at these things in a vacuum. We're not just looking at Roth conversions this year and how it impacts our tax bill this year. Or I know we'll talk about charitable giving a little bit here in a minute. How does charitable giving impact me this year? We want to look at how does this tax move, this tax strategy, if implemented now, how does that impact me over the next 10, 20, 30 years? And so again, sure, we want to know, we don't want to be surprised, right? That's the biggest thing. We don't want to get caught off guard with, oh my gosh, now my Medicare premiums are higher. I didn't know that. So we want to be aware of that, but we don't want to necessarily let that stop us, right? Because that impact of some of these other things might, far outweigh this penalty, if we want to call it, 2 years from now.
And for those who are listening, thinking, well, why don't I just go to my CPA and they'll help me with this? And I think, and I'd be curious if you disagree, I think the real difference between what a financial advisor who's well-versed in these tax strategies and these retirement planning strategies, they're not just looking at that 1 year. Oftentimes you go to someone who's just preparing taxes and they want to try to look for opportunities to lower your tax bill in a given year, whereas it is all about paying, in my opinion, the least amount of taxes over your lifetime. And as you put, Taylor, yes, we want to pay our fair share. But as a common friend famously says, you don't want to leave the IRS a tip. So ultimately, I think the Roth conversion is a really common use case in terms of pointing out where people aren't necessarily looking at the whole picture. They can be a way to reduce some impact later on if you're doing it strategically, but maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the other strategies that you like to look towards to reduce or completely avoid IRMA.
Yeah, so to reduce IRMA or even completely avoid it, we basically want to lower our modified adjusted gross income. So any ways that we can reduce our income will help us reduce or even avoid IRMA. So, Roth conversions are one of those because we're reducing our future income. We're reducing our future RMDs. So again, if we have this pot of money in a pre-tax account and we don't do anything and we enjoy our gap years and we're in that low tax bracket, at age 72, all of a sudden IRS comes knocking on our door and we have a giant tax bill. So by doing Roth conversions earlier in life, earlier in retirement, we can reduce those future RMDs and reduce our future income and potentially, avoid or reduce IRMA a little bit. Another way that we can do that is charitable giving, like I said. So, charitable giving can certainly help to knock down our income. And we can do that a couple of different ways. We can contribute cash. We can contribute appreciated assets. We can even take advantage of things like QCDs, qualified charitable distributions, which are distributions straight from your IRAs. And then lastly, one of my favorites, donor advised funds. We can contribute large sums of money in a given year and get a large tax deduction and really bring that income down in a single year if we do have a spike in taxes. So if you are charitably inclined, I think that's really important to mention here. We have to be charitably inclined if we're going to pursue a charitable giving strategy. We don't want to just give money away because there's some perceived tax benefit. But if we're already charitably inclined, if we already are giving money or want to give money, there's some really tactical ways that we can go about doing it, especially if we pair that with Roth conversions and we pair it with future things that we might be up against like IRMAA.
Well, and again, going back to this holistic view, when you are helping someone who is not yet retired, you can do those charitable things. You can do those when you are retired. While you're working, I suppose some of your other ways to reduce it would be tax-deferred contributions to certain accounts, right?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So while you're still working, if you're contributing to a traditional IRA or 401k, 403b, a solo, a simple, any of these tax-deductible, retirement accounts will continue to bring that income down as well.
And you've actually put together a really comprehensive post on what is IRMAA and different ways that you can reduce or avoid it, which is sort of what we're walking through now, that I'll be sure to link to in the show notes at thelongterminvestor.com. You also have a full podcast episode on it. So, I highly recommend people subscribe to Stay Wealthy, the podcast, and we'll get all that stuff in the show notes. But I think when you're in retirement, one of the things that it's just harder to make huge pivots. So I think, like you said, when you're willing to give away money, that makes lowering your tax bill a lot easier. A lot of the decisions you make leading up to retirement are just as important for having more control, like tax efficient investments, like putting things in the proper investment accounts. Are there any things there that you want to touch on?
Yeah, I do think you bring up something really important, and I say this all the time, which is, those 3 to 5 years before retirement, or even 10 years before retirement, and those 3 to 5 years in retirement are some of the most important and most vulnerable times in your financial life. So, if retirement is in the near future, it's important to start to think ahead and get ahead of these things. Again, going back to what I said at the very beginning, proactiveness. Proactive is this theme here of thinking ahead, not just doing nothing and, retiring and quitting your job, and all of a sudden you realize you're faced with all these different things. So there are certainly some other things that you can do even before retirement to set yourself up for success. Having options to create tax-free income in retirement. It's really, really challenging to get money in a Roth IRA. So any opportunity we have to get money in a Roth is something we want to consider. One of the things that I often talk about, and again, this is a case-by-case situation and certainly depends on a number of different factors, but I mentioned one of the pain points for our ideal client is they have a lot of money in a traditional IRA or a pre-tax 401k account that's never been taxed before. And let's just say hypothetically they're 5 years to retirement. We already know we're going to have a giant challenge of getting money out of these pre-tax accounts tax efficiently in retirement. That's already a giant challenge that we're faced with. So while they're still working, they've got 5 years left, let's say, do we want them to continue putting more money into these pre-tax accounts, making our current challenge even more challenging, right? So we want to be careful about making that problem an even bigger problem. And again, case by case, it depends. But one thing we might consider is there a way for us to maybe get more money in a Roth during those final years so that we don't make that problem bigger? And now we have more tax-free income that doesn't spike our ordinary income tax brackets and, put us up against those IRMAA brackets.
And I want to call out something for any of our listeners in their 30s and 40s who haven't tuned out yet because they say, oh my gosh, this is so far away. This touches on your proactive point, Taylor, that there's a way to roll your employer retirement account over correctly. You put it in a rollover IRA account. You can roll those back into your employer plans at some point if you want to do so. I know we did that recently where we took someone nearly, I think it was 60 or 70% of their IRA accounts were in an IRA rollover. We rolled it back into the employer so that we could do some conversions with a lower basis and ultimately take advantage of some different tax brackets that otherwise aren't really available. So the sooner that you're addressing these things, the more forward looking, the better. And I had a series of episodes over the summer, an Investing by Age series, and it aligns with what I said during the Investing in 60s and Investing in Retirement, aligns with something you just said, where I feel like there are very few moments that are more important to your financial well-being than those years. The only exception I can think of is the choice to start investing in your 20s. Honestly, I think that's maybe the most life-altering choice you can make, but really you can completely change the tax efficiency of your entire withdrawal plan, the entire investment portfolio, just by being a little bit proactive ahead of time. And if you are a do-it-yourselfer, it's all doable. But again, we've pointed out some of these mistakes people make in doing some of these otherwise great strategies. I guess, is there anything else you can think about that would help people plan ahead for IRMA in the future? Or, given that it's based on 2 years prior income, any way that you think people could make intelligent decisions based on estimates in the future?
Yeah, and let's be clear. I mean, you may be in a position where no matter what you do, even if you do all these things, you're still going to have that IRMA surcharge. And again, not a bad position to be in. Give me your income and I'll pay your taxes for you. So, you may not be able to completely get rid of IRMA. And also, we should maybe put into perspective what this, surcharge is. For Medicare Part B and Part D premiums that here in 2022, you may pay an extra, $170 per month, upwards of, close to $600 per month. So it can be a big number, but for, really good, diligent retirement savers, it may not completely break their retirement plan, right? And they may be doing other tax planning things that far outweigh what that surcharge is. So running through some other things that we can do, and really the theme is, again, reducing that modified adjusted gross income, trying to find ways to keep our income down, and just being in general, being tax efficient, being tax smart about our decisions. So we talked about charitable giving, we talked about tax deductible retirement account contributions, but be careful because you don't want to make a current problem even bigger than it is. You can also start to think about, maybe on a deeper level, your allocation and your investments. What kind of investments do you own in your investment accounts? And if we just focus in on your taxable brokerage accounts, those accounts that you have to pay taxes on each year on interest, dividends, and capital gains, we see a lot of clients that are stuck with owning what we call high turnover funds. Inside these actively managed funds, securities are being bought and sold frequently, and that increases their capital gains bill. A lot of times they're short-term capital gains, which is taxed at ordinary income. Or clients have got sucked into buying dividend-paying stocks, right? And those dividends, while they're nice, those can spike your tax bill as well. So start to think about, how can my investments be more tax efficient? Can I use exchange traded funds, ETFs? Can I use passive investment vehicles? Can I use index funds to mitigate that turnover, mitigate the taxes, and start to take more control over my tax bill? And then the last thing I'll say in this department, see what you have to add, Peter, is something called asset location. So we all know what asset allocation is, right? Percentage of stocks versus percentage of bonds. Asset location is, what type of investments do I hold in what type of account? And sometimes it makes more sense to hold bonds in a traditional IRA than it does in a brokerage account. We might put our high octane small value stocks in a Roth IRA, money that we're not going to touch maybe for a long period of time, let that grow, tax free, tax deferred for a long period of time. So we can start to get smart and get tactical about what type of investments we hold in these different types of accounts. So just something else to think about in terms of investments. And again, you might do all these things and still get stuck with IRMA, but at the end of the day, you're still creating a much more tax efficient retirement plan.
Well, and keeping on that theme of things that are within your control, you can control the withdrawal strategy, right? I'd be curious just to hear some of the strategies and things you like to think about with those that you're working with to make those withdrawals more tax efficient in general.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, when you go to pull money out of your account, and what I hear time and time again is that, Taylor, I've done a really good job of accumulating wealth, right? I'm really good at saving money and investing money and accumulating wealth. Now I need to get this money out tax efficiently. And if you want to maximize income from your portfolio, there are really two rules that you have to follow. One is that you have to have a prudent investment plan. So I say you can't just invest in whatever you feel like it. You have to have a prudent investment plan in place. And then number two, you have to have a system and a process for getting that money out. In other words, you can't just take money out of these accounts whenever you feel like it and take it out of whatever account you feel like at that time. We need to have a system and a process for getting money out of these accounts. And again, those investments need to be prudently invested as well. So we like to use a dynamic withdrawal system that adjusts to the different market environments, very different than the 4% rule where you just take 4% and multiply it by your account balance. We would call that a static withdrawal strategy. But a dynamic strategy like Guyton's guardrails, and we can certainly put the academic paper in the show notes if you'd like, adjust to those different market environments. So if the market goes down, we might take a little bit less from our portfolio. And if the market goes up, we might be eligible for a pay raise and take a little bit more. But these dynamic strategies can often be more tax efficient. So thinking about that system and that process, coupled with a lot of the other things we just talked about, the types of investments we own, can certainly help with that tax efficiency.
Well, and I think it's so helpful to have an advisor really getting you to commit to a single approach, because I think it's easy to go back and forth based on what the current environment is giving you, whether that's jumping from the 4% rule or the Guyton's guardrails, as you mentioned, or even just taking the total return investing approach. I don't know, and if you know differently, do interrupt me here, is that I don't know if there is one that is definitively better than the rest. They're all supported by evidence, and so you sort of just need to pick one. It's not all that different than a lot of investment strategies are debatably good or arguably good. So you just got to pick one. If you bounce around, you're never going to see all the benefits of those different approaches.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it depends on your goals too. I think the guardrail strategy really works well for people who are trying to maximize the income from their portfolio. They want to try to spend every possible dollar with putting putting themselves at the least amount of risk. It also just seems to resonate really well with me. What I hate about the 4% rule is it's just static, right? And I like the guardrails approach where, look, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what the market's going to do tomorrow or next month, but I can intelligently respond to those different market environments. I can follow these rules. I have a system in place. And I know if I do this over a long time period, I'm going to pass away with more than $1 in my account. So, but I think you're right. I mean, choose one that makes sense to you, that you understand and you can commit to and follow. Not all that different, Peter, than, your investment strategy, right? We don't want to jump from dividend paying stocks to ETFs, to mutual funds, to hedge funds. We do that enough times and we've gone nowhere. So we do want to pick something, a philosophy that we believe in and we can commit to.
I really appreciate you calling out how important it is to understand your objectives when choosing withdrawal strategy. Truly, truly important. No one size fits all for everybody when there are very specific objectives at hand. I guess kind of thinking about there are ways, people don't have to do all this work. Sometimes you just retire, or sometimes you're getting married. There are some life-changing events in which you can make some sort of appeal, correct, on this particular charge?
You can appeal IRMA if you feel like you got hit with a surcharge that you shouldn't have been hit with. You can certainly appeal IRMA, and there's a bit of a detailed process for it. It's a little bit painful. In the blog post that I wrote that you referenced, I've got a whole step-by-step on how to appeal IRMA. So if you ever get hit with it and you're surprised by it and you don't think it's correct, you do have 60 days to request that appeal. So again, you need to go through a few steps to make that happen, but you don't need to panic. There is a way out of it.
And again, I will definitely link to this blog post in the show notes at thelongterminvestor.com. I'm literally staring at the appeal process that Taylor's laid out. So I have no doubt that if you think this applies to you, you could take a look at it and be able to figure it out from there. Taylor.
Yeah, I love that it says the process can be started by requesting a new initial determination from Social Security. That sounds like a fun step to go through.
But the form is right there. You got it linked. You got the Social Security phone number. Anytime you're working with Social Security, you're best off making an appointment. You save yourself all sorts of time. Taylor, we have really covered a lot about a very, very specific aspect of retirement planning. Is there anything else that you think that we need to cover here on this topic, or that people who are going through some of these considerations ought to keep in mind?
I would just say, I think I'd just end up repeating myself and saying, we want to be proactive. Yes, Medicare IRMA is annoying. It can be annoying, but there are ways to reduce it, to avoid it. Also, it just means, hey, you've been a really good saver. And in some situations, you can't completely avoid it. But I think thinking about IRMA and understanding it inherently forces you to create a more tax efficient retirement plan. As you're thinking about and reading about these ways that you can reduce IRMA, it's bringing up things like Roth conversions. What do Roth conversions mean for me? How can that help me? Charitable giving, right? Tax gain harvesting is something we haven't talked about. Can I harvest gains at a 0% tax rate? So it starts to just bring up all these opportunities. Even if IRMA is not that big of a deal and it's not going to, break your retirement plan, it does force you to dig into these things and maybe find some things that could be really, really helpful to you. So again, I think it makes sense to really just to understand, to be proactive, to work with your trusted advisors if you have one, and really understand how this stuff impacts you. And maybe the last thing I'll say, and it's in the blog post there, is, the IRMA brackets do change. We do have some guidelines to try and estimate what future IRMA might look like. The brackets do assume 0% inflation, so keep that in mind. We're certainly not in a 0% inflation environment right now, but you can start to think ahead for 2023, 2024, and beyond. So again, proactive, I think, is a good theme for today's conversation.
Taylor, thanks so much for all the knowledge you've shared. You are all over the place on the internet. So where do you want people to look for you? Where can people find you most easily?
Yeah, I mean, if you enjoyed this episode here, we got a little nerdy here with IRMA. I have similar topics covered on my podcast, Stay Wealthy. Just Google it in the podcast app of your choice. But youstaywealthy.com is my website. Go check it out. There's lots of good information there. You can find the podcast. You can find my firm. That'd probably be the best place. So youstaywealthy.com.
Well, I appreciate you being here. By the time that this episode is published, we might even have the 2023 IRMA bracket. So people have something to start looking forward and planning to. And as always, if you have comments and feedback for the episode, please leave a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. And if you're watching us on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment. That helps people find us. That helps people who want to nerd out with us on these financial topics do so easily. So Taylor, again, thanks so much. And to all of you listening or watching, to long-term investing.